The latch clicked in the middle of the night, and when Gideon stepped into the shed, he found his new bride kneeling on the floor with papers spread wide, like she was counting something that wasn't supposed to be seen. Wind pressed hard against the boards as Esther slid one sheet over another, her fingers steady despite the sound of boots behind her. She didn't turn right away. The lantern at her side threw long shadows across a map marked with routes Gideon knew by heart, except hers had lines that didn't belong. Outside, a loose gate banged in the dark, and somewhere in the yard, cattle shifted restless, as if they felt it too. Gideon didn't ask what she was doing. He just stepped closer and pulled the door shut against the wind. What would you do if the stranger sent to your door already knew more about your life than you did? Stay with me and tell me what you think. The wagon came in slow, its wheels grinding against the dry road like it had no business being there. Dust hung low over Red Basin, caught in the late afternoon heat. The Hale Ranch sat alone at the edge of it all, fence lines stretching out across land that looked too stubborn to belong to anyone. Gideon Hale stood by the gate. He had been there a while, long enough for the sun to shift against his shoulders, long enough for the horses in the far pen to settle down again after noticing him. He didn't wave, didn't step forward, just watched. The wagon stopped with a small jolt. The driver glanced back once, then climbed down without a word, as if he had done his part and wanted no part in what came next. The door opened. She stepped down on her own. No hand offered. None taken. Esther Reed landed steady on the dirt, one boot sinking slightly before she adjusted her weight. She wore a plain brown dress, travel-worn, the hem brushed with dust from places that weren't here. Her hair was pulled back tight, not styled, just kept out of the way. One small valise in her hand. She looked around once, not searching, not impressed, just taking measure. Then her eyes found him. Gideon didn't move. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, the kind of size that made other men shift without realizing it. His coat hung open, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms, hands marked by rope and weather. He studied her the same way. No smile, no question. Just a look that lasted a second longer than most people could hold. Then he turned, reached for the gate, and pulled it open. The hinge gave a low, tired creak. He stepped aside. That was it. Esther walked past him without a word. The driver had already climbed back onto the wagon. By the time she crossed into the yard, the wheels were moving again, pulling away without goodbye, without witness. The dust followed it out. Silence settled back in. Inside the house, the air was cooler. Not by much, but enough to notice. The place was clean in a way that came from habit, not care. A table, 2 chairs, a stove with a blackened kettle, a shelf with tin cups stacked evenly. Gideon moved ahead of her, set a plate down on the table, then another across from it. Beans, bread, coffee already poured. He sat. She waited a moment, then took the other chair. They ate. No blessing, no conversation, just the quiet scrape of spoon against tin and the faint rattle of wind pushing against the walls. Once she reached for the bread at the same time he did. Their hands stopped short of touching. He pulled his back first. She took the piece without comment. After a while, he pushed his plate back, stood, and carried it to the basin, rinsed it, set it aside. She finished what was left on hers, did the same. When she turned, he was already at the door. "There's water out back," he said. His voice was low, rough from use more than anything else. "Towels on the hook." She nodded once. He stepped outside. The light had gone softer by then. The sky stretched wide over the basin, fading into a dull orange that didn't promise much for tomorrow. Esther found the room without asking. One bed, clean sheets, a small window that looked out toward the fence line. She set the valise down at the foot of the bed. Didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she moved around the room slowly. Ran her fingers once along the edge of the table. Checked the latch on the window. Pressed her hand lightly against the mattress as if testing something she couldn't name. Outside, she could hear him. Boot steps across the porch. Then quieter. Then still. When she looked through the window, she saw him settle into the chair near the door, hat tipped low, one arm resting across his chest. He wasn't coming back in. The habit of it showed. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty. Just a choice already made long before she arrived. Esther stood there for a moment. Then she bent, slid the valise under the bed, pushing it far enough back that it sat in shadow. Her hand lingered there a second. Then she straightened, pulled the lamp down low, and lay back without undressing. The house stayed quiet. Outside, the wind moved along the fence line, brushing dry grass against wood in a steady, restless rhythm. Gideon didn't move from the porch. Inside, Esther kept her eyes open longer than she needed to. Neither of them slept easy. Not that first night. By the time the first light stretched over the ridge, Esther was already awake. She stepped out onto the back porch with a tin cup in hand, the coffee still too hot to drink. The air held that early desert chill, the kind that faded fast once the sun cleared the hills. Somewhere beyond the fence, a mule shifted its weight, leather tack giving a soft creak. Gideon was already in the yard. He stood near the water trough, sleeves rolled, hauling a bucket up from the well. He didn't look toward the house when she came out, just kept working, steady, measured, like the day had already been decided. Esther watched a moment, then turned toward the storage shed. Inside, the smell of grain and dry wood filled the space. Sacks were stacked uneven, some marked, some not. She crouched beside one, loosened the tie, and dipped her hand in. Corn. Clean. Recently delivered. She moved to the ledger sitting on a small crate near the door. Opened it. Ran her finger down a column without sitting. Numbers didn't match the way the sacks did. Not yet a problem. Just a detail. Outside, a shout came from the far side of the fence. "Hey, watch that line!" One of the ranch hands was struggling with a section of broken wire. A calf had gotten itself halfway through, caught at the shoulders, kicking just enough to make things worse. Two men stood there, one holding the wire, the other swearing under his breath. Esther stepped out. Didn't ask. Didn't hurry. She walked straight to the fence, set her cup down on a post, and slipped her hands under the calf's front legs. "Hold the wire steady," she said, voice even. The men paused, surprised more by the tone than the words. Then they did as told. She shifted her weight, angled the animal just enough, then pulled firm and quick. The calf came free in one motion, stumbling forward before finding its footing. For a second, no one spoke. Then one of the men let out a short breath. "Well, I'll be." Esther dusted her hands off against her skirt, picked up her cup, walked back toward the house. Gideon had stopped by the well. He didn't say anything, just watched her pass. Later that morning, the men gathered near the corral, talking low. Glances followed her, not unkind, but not settled either. Travis Cole stood with them. He was a lean man, hat pulled low, eyes sharp in a way that didn't miss much. He had been on this land longer than most. Longer than Gideon, some said. He didn't smile when Esther walked by. Didn't greet her. Just said, quiet enough to carry, "Didn't figure we were hiring hands." No one answered. Esther didn't stop. By noon, the heat had settled in. Inside the house, the air felt close, the kind that pressed against your shoulders. Esther sat at the table with the ledger open again, a small stub of pencil in her hand. She didn't rewrite anything. Not yet. Just made small marks in the margin. A line here. A number circled there. Gideon came in, wiped his hands on a cloth, and poured water into a tin cup. He stood across from her, looked down at the page, then at her. "You read that?" he asked. She nodded once. He didn't ask more, just drank, set the cup down, and stepped back outside. That evening, when the cattle were brought in and counted, one of the younger hands called it out. 42. Another voice followed. Should be 48. A pause. They counted again. Same number. Travis stepped forward, looked over the line, then shrugged. Must have lost a few on the South Range. Happens. Gideon said nothing. Just stood there, arms loose at his sides. Esther watched from the fence. Didn't interrupt. Didn't correct. But her eyes moved from the cattle to Travis, then back to the gate where the trail led out. Later, inside, the lamp burned low. Esther sat at the table again, the ledger open, her pencil moving slower now. She turned a page, then another. When Gideon stepped in, she didn't look up right away. Numbers don't drift on their own, she said. He leaned against the doorframe. Things get lost, he replied. She shook her head once, still looking at the page. Not like this. Silence settled between them. He didn't push, didn't ask her to explain, just stayed there a moment longer than needed, then stepped back outside. The wind picked up after dark, brushing against the walls in long, restless strokes. Inside, Esther closed the ledger, blew out the lamp, and for a moment, in the dim light that remained, her eyes drifted toward the bed, toward the space beneath it. She didn't reach for the valise. Not yet. The wind came harder that night. It pushed along the walls, slipped through the cracks in the boards, and carried that dry, restless sound across the yard. The kind that kept a person half awake even when their eyes were closed. Gideon sat on the porch longer than usual. His chair creaked once when he leaned back, then went still again. The lantern beside him had burned low, flame flickering against the glass. Inside, the house had gone quiet. Too quiet. He noticed it without knowing why. Then came the sound. Not loud. Not enough to startle a man used to the night. Just a shift. Wood against wood. Something out of place. From the direction of the storage shed. Gideon stood. Didn't rush. Just stepped down from the porch and crossed the yard, boots steady on the dirt. The wind caught his coat, pulled at it, then let go. The shed door stood slightly open. It hadn't been like that earlier. He pushed it wider with one hand. Inside, a lantern burned low near the floor. Esther sat beside it, not startled, not hiding, just sitting there with papers spread out across the planks, her knees drawn close, sleeves rolled back the same way she worked during the day. Maps, loose sheets, a small leather-bound book that didn't belong to anything in his house. She didn't look up right away, kept her eyes on the lines in front of her, tracing something with the tip of her finger. Gideon stayed in the doorway, watched, waited. After a moment, she spoke. I was wondering when you'd come out. Her voice was even. No edge to it. No apology either. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him to keep the wind from killing the flame. Still didn't ask. She shifted one of the papers toward the light. This isn't your handwriting, she said, tapping the ranch ledger page she had brought with her. But it's what you've been working off of. He nodded once. She picked up the smaller book. Worn edges, pages filled tight. This is mine. That made him look closer. She finally raised her eyes to his. For a while, I kept books for a transport outfit out of Dodge City. The wind rattled the door behind them. Gideon didn't interrupt. Didn't move any closer either. They moved cattle across 3 territories, she went on. Good routes, clean contracts. On paper. Her thumb pressed lightly against the spine of the book. Numbers didn't line up there either. Not at first. Just small gaps. A head here, 2 there. She slid another sheet forward. A rough map. Lines drawn between towns. Markings at crossings, river bends, waypoints. Then I started tracking where they were counted and where they weren't. Gideon took a step closer now. Not enough to crowd her. Just enough to see. The lines connected. Not random. Not mistakes. They said I was reading it wrong, she said. Said I didn't understand how things worked out here. Her voice didn't change. But the numbers kept going missing. A long pause. The lantern flame dipped, then steadied. What happened? Gideon asked. She held his gaze a second, then looked back down. They needed someone to blame before it got noticed higher up. Simple. Clean. Final. Gideon let that settle. Then he looked at the map again, at the marks she had made over his land. You think it's the same? He asked. Esther didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the ranch ledger and turned it toward him. Her finger moved down the page. These shipments, she said, tapping one line, they don't match what came in. Another tap. And this one doesn't match what went out. He followed her hand, felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger. Recognition. She slid the map closer to him. The trail your cattle take south. There's a break here. Her finger rested on a bend just past the dry wash. Easy place to split a herd, hard place to track after. The wind pushed hard against the door again. Gideon stared at the spot, then at her. You're sure? It wasn't a question. She met his eyes. Yes. Silence stretched between them. No panic, no rush, just the weight of something settling into place. Then she said it, quiet, direct. The ones taking your cattle, they're not coming in from outside. Another pause. Gideon's jaw tightened, just slightly. He didn't ask who. Didn't need to, not yet. He pulled a chair over with one hand and set it down beside her. Sat. The boards creaked under his weight. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on the map. Show me, he said. Esther nodded once, and just like that, the space between them changed. Not softer, not easier, but closer. The lantern burned lower as the night went on. Outside, the wind kept moving across Red Basin like it always had. Inside the shed, 2 people sat shoulder to shoulder over a problem that didn't belong to either of them alone anymore. For the first time since she stepped off that wagon. Esther wasn't the only one awake. Morning came without softness. The sun rose hard over Red Basin, burning away the last of the night wind. By the time the light reached the yard, Gideon was already moving between the pens, checking gates, running his hand along the fence line where the wire dipped low. Esther stood at the table inside. The ledger lay open, her book beside it. 2 sets of numbers, 1 truth. She heard his boots on the porch before he stepped in. He didn't knock, didn't clear his throat. Just came inside and set something on the table. A ring of keys. Heavy. Worn. The kind that stayed on a man for years. He didn't look at her when he did it. Storehouse, south gate, feed room, he said. Rest you'll figure. That was all. No speech, no warning. Esther glanced at the keys, then up at him. He had already turned toward the door. Outside, the men were gathering. Word had started to move, quiet at first, then a little louder. Not about missing cattle. Not yet. About her. Travis stood near the hitching rail, talking low to two of the older hands. When Gideon stepped out, the conversation stopped just enough to be noticed. Esther came out a moment later. The keys in her hand made a soft sound when they shifted. Travis's eyes went to them, then to Gideon, then back to her. "You handing things over now?" he asked, tone light but not friendly. Gideon didn't answer right away. He walked past him, checked the cinch on one of the saddles, pulled it tight with a firm motion. "She'll keep the books," he said. That was it. No explanation, no argument offered. Travis let out a short breath through his nose. "Didn't know we were changing how things run," he said. Gideon straightened, met his eyes. "We ain't," he replied. The words hung there, not loud, not sharp, but they landed. Work went on. Cattle were driven out in small groups. Dust rose under hooves, drifting across the yard in slow waves. Esther moved between the buildings, unlocking doors, checking stock, marking small notes in the margins of the ledger she carried tucked under her arm. No one stopped her, but no one helped either. By midday, the heat pressed down hard. She stood in the shade of the storehouse, comparing counts. Sacks stacked inside didn't match the last delivery recorded. Not by much, but enough. She made a mark. Across the yard, Travis watched her, didn't hide it. Later, when one of the younger hands spoke up, just a question, nothing more, about why numbers were being changed, Travis answered before she could. "Maybe we got ourselves someone who likes to rewrite things," he said. A few of the men shifted, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just waiting. Esther closed the ledger, looked at the man who had asked. "You counted 42 yesterday," she said. He nodded, unsure. "You'll count the same today," she went on. "If it's different, I'll write it different." Simple. Clean. Nothing to argue with. The man looked down, then back at the herd. Travis didn't smile. Evening came slower that day. The sky stretched out wide and pale, the kind that made every sound carry farther. Gideon stood by the fence again, arms resting along the top rail, watching the cattle settle. Esther stepped up beside him. Not close, not far. He didn't look at her right away. "South Trail," she said. "That's where it breaks." He nodded once. "I know the spot." She held the ledger against her side. "Who rides it most?" A pause. Then, "Travis?" The name sat there between them. No surprise, just confirmation. The wind picked up again, lighter this time, brushing past them and carrying the dry smell of the land. Gideon shifted his weight, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. Old, creased. He handed it to her. "Last shipment," he said. She opened it, ran her eyes over the numbers, then over the signature at the bottom. Travis Cole. She folded it back the same way and handed it to him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. In the distance, one of the cattle let out a low call. Gideon pushed off the fence. "We don't call it out yet," he said. Esther nodded. "Not yet." They stood there a second longer. Then he turned toward the house. She followed, the keys quiet in her hand. That night, the lamp burned longer than before. Not because either of them had more to say, but because neither of them was ready to stop looking. The day of the cattle exchange came without ceremony. A line of wagons rolled in from the south road just after mid-morning, wheels cutting shallow grooves into the packed earth. The buyers came dressed a little cleaner than the men who worked the land, coats brushed, hats shaped careful. They carried ledgers of their own. Gideon stood near the holding pen, one hand resting along the top rail. He hadn't changed much from any other day. Same coat, same boots worn at the heel. Esther stood a few paces behind him. Not hidden, not forward either. The keys rested in her palm, quiet. Travis moved first. He stepped toward the buyers with a nod, speaking easy, like nothing in the world had shifted. He gestured toward the herd, explained numbers, routes, delivery points, same way he always had. One of the buyers opened his book. 48 head? The man asked. Travis nodded without hesitation. That's right. A pause. The man glanced at the cattle, then back at the page. Esther stepped forward. Just one step, not loud, not rushed. 42, she said. The word settled into the space between them. Travis didn't turn right away, but his shoulders stiffened. We counted yesterday, he said. 48. Esther didn't raise her voice. She walked to the small table set near the pen and laid the ledger down flat. Opened it, turned it so the buyer could see. These are the deliveries from the last 3 weeks, she said. And these are the routes they took. Her finger moved across the page, steady. 6 missing here, 4 here, 2 there. The buyer leaned in. Travis laughed once, sharp. You trusting that over what's standing in front of you? Esther didn't look at him. Instead, she reached into the fold of her dress and pulled out a second book, the worn leather one. Set it beside the ranch ledger. Opened it to a marked page. These are the same routes, she said. Different ranch, same losses. Now Travis turned, slow. You got no business bringing outside books into this, he said. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried. A few of the ranch hands shifted. Gideon hadn't moved, not once. He stood behind Esther now, close enough that his shadow touched the edge of the table. The buyer looked between the 2 books, then at Travis. Your name's on these receipts, he said, tapping the page. Esther slid the folded paper Gideon had given her the night before across the table. The crease opened. The signature showed clear. Travis Cole. For a second, nothing happened. Then the wind picked up. Dust moved across the yard in a low sweep, brushing past boots and wagon wheels. Travis's jaw tightened. You think you can come in here, he said, looking at Esther now, and tell us how things run? She met his eyes, didn't flinch. I think the numbers speak for themselves. Simple. Nothing added. The buyer closed his ledger, looked at Gideon. You stand by this? He asked. Gideon didn't step forward, didn't raise his voice. He just rested his hand on the back of the chair Esther had used the night before, steady and sure. Yes. That was enough. Travis let out a breath through his nose, something close to a smile, but not quite. You're making a mistake, he said. Gideon didn't answer, didn't need to. The silence stretched long enough that it settled into the bones of the place. One of the other men moved away from Travis. Then another. Not dramatic, just space opening where there hadn't been any before. By afternoon, the wagons were gone. The deal cut smaller, cleaner, honest. The yard felt different once the dust settled. Quieter. Esther stood by the fence, watching the last of the wheels disappear down the road. She didn't turn when Gideon walked up beside her. Didn't speak. He rested his arms along the top rail again. Same as before, but not the same. The north road's clear, he said after a while. Weather held up past the ridge. She nodded slightly. If you head that way, you won't have trouble getting through. A long pause, the kind that didn't ask for anything, didn't expect an answer. Esther looked out toward the horizon, the line where the land stretched into something else. Then she glanced back at the house, at the yard, at the work left behind. Her hand brushed lightly against her dress. No valise. Not this time. She turned back to the fence. Didn't say a word. Gideon didn't ask. He pushed off the rail and walked back toward the house, slow, steady, like any other evening. Behind him, she followed. Not close, not far, just there. And for the first time since that wagon had pulled away from Red Basin, no one was waiting to leave. The days that followed didn't look much different from the ones before. The same dust rising under hooves, the same wind brushing along the fence posts at dusk, the same quiet house at the edge of land that didn't promise anything easy. But something had shifted. Not in a way you could point to, not in something you could name, just in the space between two people who had once kept their distance like it was the only way to survive. Gideon still worked before the sun came up. Esther still kept her books clean and exact. They didn't speak much. But sometimes, that wasn't where the truth lived. It showed in smaller things, in the way he stopped leaving his coffee on the far end of the table, in the way she no longer checked the door twice before nightfall, in how neither of them felt the need to explain why they stayed. Out here, a person didn't get handed many clean chances. Most folks carried what they'd lost longer than what they'd found. But every now and then, someone stepped into your life without asking for anything back, and stayed long enough to prove they meant it. Not with words, with work, with time, with quiet. And maybe that's what this was. Not a rescue, not a bargain. Just two people choosing day after day not to walk away. So if you had to choose, would you have trusted someone the way Gideon did? Or would you have kept your distance like it was safer that way? If this story stayed with you, there are more waiting just down the road. Stories about people who found something steady in places no one thought to look. You're always welcome to ride along.